Alternative crops, there's a bunch of, I've got a link here to the USDA. I've got a lot of links to the USDA and Agriculture Canada in today's class. There's a huge resource at both of those locations for this kind of stuff, alternative crops, trying to figure out what can I grow that's different and what do the markets look like. There's an interesting article in the Greenhouse magazine there encouraging floriculture growers to consider veggie crops in off-peak seasons. Um, Looking at some recent greenhouse crops that have been attempted or are still being done, raspberries are becoming popular. Strawberries we know about already. Asian vegetables are really interesting. There's a lot of different cultures that are mixed up in our cities, and they have interesting needs, and there's opportunities to supply those needs. Um, Herbs done already on a large scale, but there's always opportunities for herbs, both living and cut. Microgreens, you've seen it all. Medicinal plants, this is something that's kind of interesting because medicinal plants have been around for a long time, believe it or not. You know, you go to the pharmacy and there's a whole section on vitamins. And if you go through and look, you'll see a lot of those are plant extracts and they were provided by a farm. Medicinal plant production is a big business in Europe, Germany, and France. There are a lot of farms that grow crops specifically for extraction or just making uh, dried leaf preparations, I guess. Stevia is an interesting market that has really evolved in recent years. I don't know that there's a ton of opportunities in North America that's being done in places like Bangladesh and whatnot. Lavender is huge. A lot of lavender farms around, but probably still room for more. Um, then there's always interesting cut flowers. A lot of farms are very successful with perennials that produce cut flowers. Flowering shrubs they can trim every year. So these are sort of alternative crops that we're going to look at today. Um, there's a picture of something called bitter melon that is an example of an Asian crop, very unique produce. Cantaloupes in hydroponics. Interesting. I don't know. Right now, it's hard to say if there's money in it or not, but sometimes cantaloupes are selling for $5 a piece. That means the farmer is probably getting $3, and depending on where you live, there may be opportunities. Eggplants is emerging as a major market. In Leamington, I think probably only 5% of the square footage is dedicated to eggplants, but 5% of whatever it is, 26 million square feet is a pretty substantial area. Other examples of high wire would be peppers, like in the greenhouse of the college, we're experimenting with hot peppers. I think there's some interesting opportunities there as well. Um, so how do you proceed? So first, you have is there a market? Obviously, what can you charge before you get in too far? Is there enough of a value in it? How big is the market? Should you go wholesale or do you go retail? Remember, we talked a bit about that before. The difference wholesale meaning you're selling to a reseller and then they're going to sell it. Where retail, you sell direct, either from your farm or at a farmer's market. And then, of course, calculating your cost. We've done that. I'm not going to go into details on that. And at the end of the day, you have to decide, is it worth it? And I will add that probably one of the most important things is, do you enjoy it? There might be good money in growing hot peppers, but maybe you don't know anything about hot peppers, you don't like spicy food, you would be the wrong candidate for growing hot peppers. Can you imagine trying to sell stuff at the food terminal or at the farmer's market saying, hey, how does this taste, Bob? Like, I don't know, I've never tried it. Uh, Not going to work well. Um, in business schools, they talk about a SWOT analysis as part of the early stages of a business plan. And that means SWOT is an acronym, obviously, for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Um, what strengths do you bring to the table? You know, do you have previous experience in this business? Maybe you've been employed by a farm that's grown something like that, so you have the groundwork for being able to produce a successful crop rather than having to learn everything off the get-go. Do you have experience in sales or marketing? Maybe that will help override some of your weaknesses in the early stages of growing. So being honest about these things is critical. Weaknesses, do you have time? Are you doing this part-time or not? Can you do it all by yourself? Do you need a partner? And a big one, of course, is money. Do you have enough? Do you have enough energy? To get something like this up and running takes a lot of energy. And if you're someone who's sort of already maybe a bit apprehensive and, you know, don't want to be what they call a go-getter, then I think you probably should not even embark on this. Um, Opportunities, well, this is business 101. Are there other people out there? Is there a totally new product where you're creating a market? That could be seen as a real opportunity if you have no competitors. And then, of course, threats, blocked by my picture, competitors or government. In many cases, just look at the cannabis industry right now. That's a pretty good example of where the government is actually your biggest hindrance or threat, not only just federal, provincial, but even municipal. All right, so for assessing a market, you're going to look at what are the features and benefits of your product. I don't know, these are kind of ho-hum stuff, but who's your target market? Who are you selling to? Is there demand? And what volume of product do you need? I'll give you an example. Um, a few years ago, I was approached by someone who asked if I was interested in growing something called Callaloo. Callaloo is an amaranth variety. It's sold in different colors, typically green. It's a leafy green, and it is consumed by the Jamaican market in Toronto. And there's a huge demand for Callaloo for their Jamaican diet. Uh, and there was not a sufficient supply at the food terminal. So I looked into it at the time and looked at pricing and availability. And it's interesting. I didn't actually pursue it. That was when we decided to go with lettuce. But field production of Callaloo could be very profitable for someone in the summertime in Toronto. If you made connections into the Jamaican community, which is substantial in Toronto, you would sell a lot of Callaloo. So that would be an example. So there's features. It's unique. It's got a target ethnic group. There's demand. The next thing would be what's the volume? Well, there's a fair amount of Jamaicans. You could connect to Jamaican ethnic grocery stores. Those exist. Establish some guidelines or maybe idea of how much you need to produce to be in that market. So is it a seasonal market? Going back to my Callaloo example, it is a green. Greens typically sell more in the summer, spring, summer, fall months. Maybe it is better suited to field production. Possibly hoop house in combination with field production would give you extended seasons. Remember, the shoulder seasons are where the prices are higher. Distribution. What's the best way to reach your target? Obviously, the fewer steps between you and the end user means there's more money for you. So if you sell directly to a consumer, you absorb all the profits. Anytime there's someone in between, you're going to lose some. Competition, whatever. Trends. That's an interesting one. People are very trendy. It's tricky. Sometimes you don't want to. I think you don't want to be involved in the fad scene. So something that may look really popular on the internet may only have a 6-month lifespan, and it takes time to get a product up and going and packaging and marketing and then get it to the market, and by then the fad is past. So specialty diet fads, I think, is a crazy scene you want to avoid. But more consistent historical demand type things, maybe going back to other countries to see what they have there, and then coming back and saying, hey, you know, I can get you this in Canada fresh. That's a possibility for sure. Pricing, we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I have a link there, it says commodity pricing. You click on that, That's pretty cool. It's a website where you have drop down menus for a lot of agricultural product, and you have historical pricing. A tremendous resource. Now, you may not find your exact product you're looking for, but if you find something that is closely related, you may be able to bracket your market to get an estimation of what prices could turn out or where to start with your asking price. Expected sales, that's a tricky one. That's going to be hard. Maybe some surveys, visiting stores, online surveys. I don't know. That's a tricky one. But typically, a business is going to ramp up slowly, and you get a better sense once you get going. You probably just need enough sales to get off your feet and running. But that I don't have a good answer for that one. This is a screenshot of the Agriculture Canada website where you can drop down various commodities, choose the year. You can look at 2018, 2015, 2020, whatever. You can select drop down for wholesale Montreal or Toronto, and they'll give you pretty good pricing information, which I think, and that's wholesale, not retail. There is some available, but yeah. Where to sell? Farmers markets, we know about that. Community supported agriculture, CSA, some of you may be familiar with that, may not. That's where a farm produces a package of mixed produce, and then that is shipped on a weekly or bi-weekly or monthly basis to a customer. They don't always have control of what's in the box. It's based on availability. That's how farms with produce can establish markets. And also it's a bit easier if they don't have great control over what product is coming for anticipating sales. They just have a blanket statement saying, look, we'll put roughly this proportion of greens to root and whatnot in the box. Then, of course, there's direct customer retail, right? Selling online. There's a company in north of Toronto called Richter's Herbs that sells living potted herbs in boxes. They've spent a lot of time developing packaging to get the plants into a box and shipped and arriving at a customer's place alive, even if the box is upside down. That's pretty amazing. As far as the cannabis industry, which is an interesting aside, there's a company in Ontario that's selling cannabis clones direct to consumers to grow for themselves. And in their specialized packaging, they have a single-use package with a battery and an LED light that maintains a photo period so that the clone doesn't turn into flower mode while it's being shipped. That's pretty cool. People will pay a lot of money for that. Don't know how that's going to go, but they've been up at it already for about 6 months. Maybe when I Google it up, I'll look for a link. Agritourism. So lavender farms are a really good example where people come to the farm and there's all kinds of byproducts and lavender itself, dried, fresh. They can sell directly at the door. Again, the cannabis industry is something that might head that way with micros, or even hemp farms, for example, producing hemp products that can sell at the farm. These are opportunities that will likely evolve in the coming months. Certification, we've talked about organic before. Obviously, that's a powerful marketing tool. Selling to institutions, something worth considering. They're not insignificant. A lot of schools have meal programs, elementary schools looking for produce and whatnot. That link in the bottom is to the food terminal. There's actually a better video under the Week 11 folder. If you click on that, you should watch it. It talks to some of the wholesalers in the food terminal and the history of it. As far as bringing products, new products to a market, there's a couple of things we should go through. This is the classic supply and demand. This should be fairly obvious, but review it anyways. So demand is consumer demand, right? So lots of people want it or not a lot of people want it. And supply, it's typically in the life of a product, you have low supply initially, and then as the market matures, supply increases. That can be through competitors or through a company just being successful and growing and increasing its capacity, and in a sense, supplying the market, maybe even oversupplying. So typically as demand drops and supply increases, there's a tipping point where the product's no longer making money. As far as price, going back to supply and demand, quality is a factor that should not be ignored. So if you're in an established market, so let's say you're growing lettuce, lettuce can go anywhere from 99 cents a head to $4 a head. One of the driving factors would be varietal, right? Are you growing romaine or are you growing something else? But the bigger one would be quality. So as your quality goes up, you can charge more. So sometimes you can base a business alone just on the fact that you can produce quality, but that means you need to have tried and true systems and be confident that you will achieve the quality targets that you set out to hit. Product life cycle. This is something that everything has a life, right? There's the introduction to the market where it's new, it's novel, you've got some tentative customers. Then there's a growth phase where there's lots of growing demand and people are really excited about it. And then there's a maturing phase where the market sort of settles down, people have established their routines, not a lot of new growth. And then sometimes and often there's a decline towards the end. Typically, you look at a product life cycle, even in farming, that's sort of an opportunity for you to say, okay, so I'm starting this new commodity. I'm going to go through a growth phase. And instead of pulling all the money out, you're going to take some of that money and reinvest into R&D and introduce new products as you go. So taking some of your money and channeling it back into the business to stay innovative, that's usually the sign of a successful company because they recognize that every product has a life cycle. Instead of trying to milk the same thing forever, it won't work. So that's an important concept to remember. Here's another graph talking about market and price aging. This is the idea of producer versus consumer surplus. It's a similar model to the supply and demand, essentially, and talking about where equilibrium is achieved. So one of the things about pricing is that pricing doesn't necessarily have to be static. So you've brought a new product to the market. So you've decided to do raspberries in your hoop house. They're organic, they're huge, they're sweet, top quality. Typically, your pricing is going to come in high at first. We call this skim pricing, right? So you're going to sell at that high price, and you're going to know that you're going to end up skimming your price down as the market matures. So it's important to think through your initial sales price, knowing that you're going to notch it down as the product matures in the market. And then there's your final price where you are just barely making enough money to cover your costs. And it's important that you're honest with all that stuff so that you are not going backwards. So this is what they call penetration pricing. This is where basically the idea is you keep evolving your production practices. In greenhouses, that can be automation, innovation in packaging, something that will reduce your costs. So as your price notches down, you maintain your margins or minimize the chance of the two crossing. So maybe in the early days, you don't have as much money, you're not as innovative, your cost of production would be higher. As your business grows and evolves and as the price drops, you also have the benefits of scale, right? So as you get bigger, maybe you can get better bargains on input costs. Maybe you can afford some machinery that might automate something like packaging or labeling, and that will help cut costs so that you can maintain profitability. There's a couple more links to alternative crops. Normally what I do is have a fairly short lesson, and then we break out into groups and we work for half an hour or so on a crude sort of scenario for a crop that we look up. Obviously we can't do that since we're online. It was not marked, it was a participation thing. I'm going to encourage you to go through these links, watch the video, click on the commodities list, and spend a few minutes thinking and dreaming of what you might do if someone gave you the opportunity to start a greenhouse business, or maybe even field production, whatever you want. I don't know. That's all I have for today. I hope you guys are doing well, and apologies for the format. Yes, I'm still wearing a hat.